When Diego Mendoza, Madrid's richest and most solitary heir, refused for the 10th time to dance at the capital's most exclusive charity ball, no one could imagine that everything would change the moment Carmen, the cleaning woman, entered the ballroom with her daughter dressed as a waitress. What happened in those 10 minutes of dancing not only shocked the 300 most influential guests in Spain, but revealed a family secret that Diego had kept for 20 years. Because sometimes the purest love hides behind the humblest uniforms. It was the night of March 15th, when the golden halls of the Mendoza family's Crystal Palace, the 17th-century mansion on the outskirts of Madrid, filled with the cream of Madrid's high society for the traditional spring ball. The crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections on the Macael marble, while the chamber orchestra played fine waltzes that resonated between the pink marble columns. Diego Mendoza, 35 years old, heir to the Mendoza capital financial empire, valued at €2 billion, wandered among the guests with the glacial elegance that had made him famous in high finance circles. His custom-made Loewe tuxedo and platinum cufflinks, which had belonged to his great-grandfather, distinguished him even among the magnates present. But it was his steel-gray eyes and controlled smile that kept him distant from everyone. The evening had begun as always, a procession of heiresses, models, and industrialist daughters who approached Diego hoping to win a dance, and therefore a place in his heart and his patrimony. There was Paloma Vasquez, daughter of the textile magnate, in her Palomo Spain dress that cost as much as a car. Lucia Martin, international top model who wore jewelry valued at $500,000, and Esperanza de Borbon, aristocratic heiress whose studied smile hid millimetric calculations about the benefits of marriage to the Mendozas. One after another, Diego rejected them all with the same cold, distant courtesy. It wasn't arrogance, but an insurmountable barrier he had built around his heart after the tragedy that had marked his youth. 20 years ago, he had lost his lifelong girlfriend, Esperanza, daughter of the family's housekeeper, in an accident that still tormented him every night. Esperanza had been the only woman who had loved him for what he really was, not for what he possessed. She was the daughter of Rosa, the housekeeper who had raised Diego after his mother's premature death. Esperanza and Diego had grown up together in the palace. He, the young lord, she, the servant's daughter, but united by an authentic love that defied social conventions. The night of the accident, Esperanza was running toward the Crystal Palace for her 18th birthday, when a car struck her right in front of the estate's gates. Diego had found her dying in his arms, and Esperanza's last words had been a promise. "Someday you'll find someone who will love you as I love you, but you'll have to know how to recognize true love, even if it comes dressed differently than you expect." Since that night, Diego had never danced with any woman again. He participated in society balls out of family and business duty, but his heart had been buried with Esperanza. High society ladies courted him for prestige and wealth, but none possessed that purity of soul that had characterized Esperanza. While the orchestra played the umpteenth waltz and couples moved elegantly on the marble dance floor with inlays, Diego took refuge in his usual position, leaning on the balustrade of the terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens with a glass of Dom Pérignon champagne in his hand that he never really touched. The whispers of guests reached him at intervals. High society ladies commented on his perpetual solitude with a mixture of fascination and frustration. He was Spain's most desirable and unreachable man, the one every mother dreamed of as a son-in-law and every woman wanted to conquer, but who remained eternally distant like a marble statue. What no one knew was that Diego, every night after these mundane events, went to the Almudena cemetery to bring white orchids to Esperanza's grave. It was his ritual of atonement, the way to remind himself that he had already found and lost true love, and that everything else was just pale imitations. But that night, fate had prepared a surprise for him that would change everything. At 10:30 p.m., while the party reached its peak and the orchestra played Strauss's Blue Danube, a discreet figure appeared at the entrance of the main hall. It was Carmen Lopez, 52 years old, head of the palace service staff, who for 15 years had quietly taken care of the mansion's maintenance and cleaning with absolute dedication. Carmen shouldn't have been present during the ball. The service staff had the strict task of remaining invisible during mundane events, managing everything from the kitchens and service corridors. However, that night she had her daughter with her, and this changed everything. Walking beside Carmen was a 24-year-old young woman with long chestnut hair pulled back in an impeccable bun and wearing the black uniform with white apron of the service staff. It was Sofia Lopez, a fine arts graduate from the Complutense Universität, who that night was helping her mother to earn some extra euros to pay for the restoration master's degree she dreamed of pursuing. Sofia had something extraordinary that transcended her social condition. Despite the waitress uniform, her bearing was naturally elegant, her movements fluid like those of a dancer, and in her hazel eyes shone a vivacious intelligence and artistic sensitivity that immediately distinguished her. When mother and daughter crossed the hall to reach the kitchens, an imperceptible silence fell over the most attentive guests. It wasn't just Sofia's beauty that captured attention, but something deeper, an authenticity that contrasted sharply with the artificiality of the surrounding environment. Diego, from his privileged observatory on the terrace, immediately noticed the newcomer. For the first time in 20 years, his gaze fixed on a woman, and he couldn't look away. It wasn't physical attraction, or at least not only that. It was as if an electric shock had gone through him, awakening emotions he thought buried forever. Sofia moved among the guests with natural grace, serving champagne and canapés with a genuine smile that illuminated her face. She didn't have the perfect artificial beauty of the heiresses present, but she possessed something infinitely more valuable, an inner light that made her magnetic without effort. Diego observed how Sofia interacted with the guests. She was polite and respectful, but not servile. When a Catalan industrialist tried to be inappropriate with her, Sofia managed to maintain her dignity by moving away with class without creating scenes, but clearly making her limits understood. She was strong without being aggressive, sweet without being weak. What most impacted Diego was a specific moment. While Sofia was serving some tapas to a group of high society ladies, she heard one of them comment disparagingly on another guest's dress. Sofia said nothing, but Diego saw in her eyes a flash of compassion for the criticized woman and noticed how she discreetly approached that lady to sincerely compliment her. It was a small gesture, invisible to most, but one that revealed a noble soul. Diego realized he was observing someone who possessed that absolute rarity that was genuine goodness, something he hadn't seen again since Esperanza had died. The orchestra was about to begin the most important waltz of the evening, that traditional one that opened the final phase of the ball. As always, all the ladies present looked toward Diego, hoping to be chosen for that dance that represented the culminating moment of the social event of the year. But Diego, for the first time in 2 decades, was heading toward a woman. His steps carried him inexorably toward Sofia, who at that moment was collecting empty glasses from the buffet table, completely unaware of the attention she had captured. Diego's heartbeat accelerated as he approached. He didn't know what he was doing, he only knew he had to speak with her. He had to discover who this young woman was who had rekindled something inside him that he thought had died forever. When Diego approached Sofia, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Conversations gradually faded, laughter vanished, and even the orchestra seemed to play more softly, as if everyone perceived that something extraordinary was about to happen. Sofia was arranging crystal glasses on a silver tray when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and found herself face to face with the man she had seen from afar all night, but who was now in front of her with an intensity in his eyes that left her breathless. Diego looked at her for seconds that seemed eternal. Up close, Sofia was even more fascinating. Her skin had the golden tone of someone who works under the sun. Her hazel eyes were deep and sincere, and her slightly calloused hands revealed a life of honest work that contrasted with the perfectly manicured hands of the heiresses present. With a voice that betrayed an emotion he hadn't felt for 20 years, Diego said to her, "Would you grant me this dance?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sofia looked at him with incredulity, sure she had misunderstood. It was impossible that Diego Mendoza, the richest and most influential man present, was asking her, a waitress, to dance. However, his sincere gaze and the hand extended toward her left no room for doubt. Around her, the world of Madrid's high society was experiencing a collective shock. Paloma Vasquez, who had waited all night to be chosen, visibly paled. Lucia Martin put a hand to her chest, as if she had received a blow to the heart. Esperanza de Borbon looked at the scene with her mouth open, unable to believe what she was seeing. Comments began to spread like a wave. "He's gone mad," whispered the Countess of Alba. "A waitress? A waitress," murmured the Count of Romanones. "This will be in all the newspapers tomorrow," bitterly predicted the Duchess of Osuna. But Diego heard none of this. His eyes were concentrated only on Sofia, who looked at him with a mixture of fear and astonishment. Sofia knew that accepting that invitation would mean crossing an invisible but insurmountable line that separated her world from Diego's. Carmen Lopez, who had witnessed the scene from afar, discreetly approached her daughter with the intention of removing her from the embarrassing situation. But when she saw Diego's gaze, something stopped her. In those gray eyes there was no condescension or whim of a bored rich man. There was something Carmen immediately recognized. It was the same look she had seen 20 years ago when Diego looked at Esperanza. Sofia, after what seemed like an eternity, delicately left the tray on the nearest table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was firm when she responded, "It would be an honor, Mr. Mendoza." Diego offered her his arm with the gallantry of a gentleman from other times, and together they headed toward the center of the dance floor. Each step resonated like thunder in the surreal silence of the hall. The guests stepped aside, forming a perfect circle around the floor, as if witnessing an event of historical importance. The orchestra, after a moment of uncertainty, began to play a slow, melodic waltz. Diego placed his right hand on Sofia's waist with infinite delicacy, while with his left he took her hand. The contact was electric for both. When they began to move, something magical happened. Sofia moved with a natural grace that made each step of the waltz flow like water. She had never danced in a gala hall, but she had in her blood that musicality that transformed each movement into poetry. Diego, who hadn't danced for 20 years, immediately found the rhythm, as if his body had been waiting precisely for that moment to live again. While they danced, the world around them seemed to fade away. Diego looked into Sofia's eyes and saw the same purity, the same authenticity he had loved in Esperanza. But Sofia wasn't a copy of Esperanza. She was something new, unique, unexpectedly perfect. The dance lasted 4 minutes, but for Diego and Sofia, it was like an eternity of perfection. When the music ended and they stopped in the center of the floor, the silence in the hall was total. Then slowly, applause began, not enthusiastic but respectful, as if everyone had understood they had witnessed something special. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. Diego accompanied Sofia to the edges of the floor, and delicately kissed her hand, as was done in ancient times. "Thank you," he said simply, but in that word was a world of meaning. Sofia blushed and lowered her gaze. Then she returned toward the kitchens accompanied by her mother. But before leaving the hall, she turned one last time toward Diego. Their eyes met through the crowd, and in that gaze was the silent promise that this wouldn't be the last time. The 24 hours following the ball were a true earthquake in Madrid's high society world. The news that Diego Mendoza had danced with a waitress spread through the capital's salons like an uncontrolled fire. fueled by social networks and the gossip of the ladies who had been present that night. The morning newspapers picked up the news with sensational headlines. "The Millionaire and Cinderella, Scandal at the Crystal Palace," headlined El País. "Diego Mendoza shock, dances with domestic employee," proclaimed ABC. Even international tabloids appropriated the story, transforming that dance into a media case of European reach. Diego, sitting in his office on the 42nd floor of the Four Towers skyscraper that housed Mendoza Capital's headquarters, read the newspapers with a mixture of annoyance and determination. He had never cared about high society gossip, but this time feelings he hadn't experienced for 20 years were involved. The phone rang incessantly. His secretary, Mrs. Jimenez, informed him that he had received calls from 20 media outlets, 5 television programs, and countless high society friends who wanted to know what had gone through his mind. But the call that hit him hardest was from his uncle Fernando, the only family member he had left and minority partner in the company. Fernando Mendoza, 70 years old, was the embodiment of the most conservative family traditions. He had always expected Diego to marry a woman of his social class to consolidate economic alliances and keep the family lineage pure. The call was brief but cutting. "Diego, I hope you've realized the indecorous spectacle you offered last night. Our family has a reputation to maintain." But Diego no longer felt the weight of others' expectations. For the first time in 20 years, he had experienced something authentic and wasn't willing to give it up for social conventions. He decided to do what his heart suggested: find Sofia and truly get to know her. Information about Sofia Lopez wasn't difficult to obtain. She had lived for years in her mother's house, in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts. She had earned her fine arts degree with top grades, working nights to pay for her studies, and dreamed of specializing in the restoration of ancient artworks. She was a girl of solid values, raised by a single mother who had sacrificed everything to give her an education. Diego decided to show up at her house without prior notice. When he rang the bell of the small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building from the 1960s, it was Carmen who opened the door. He recognized her immediately, and her expression became worried. "Mr. Mendoza, if you've come because of problems related to last night—" "I've come because I'd like to get to know your daughter better," Diego interrupted with disarming sincerity. "Not out of curiosity or whim, but because last night I felt something I haven't experienced for a long time." Carmen looked him in the eyes and saw the same vulnerability she had noticed the night before. She was a wise woman who had raised her daughter, teaching her to recognize sincere people from false ones. In Diego, she saw pain, loneliness, but also a sincerity that reassured her. Sofia appeared behind her mother, dressed simply in jeans and a white t-shirt, her hair loose over her shoulders. Without the makeup and uniform from the night before, she was even more beautiful, with that natural beauty that needs no adornments to shine. "I've read the newspapers," Sofia said with a firm voice. "I'm sorry if our dance has caused you problems." Diego smiled for the first time in 20 years with genuine happiness. "The only problems it has caused me are those that derive from not being able to stop thinking about you." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. Diego and Sofia talked about art, dreams, life. He discovered that she painted in her free time, that she loved classical music, that she read Lorca, and that she dreamed of restoring the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel. Sofia discovered that Diego, behind the facade of the impenetrable businessman, was a cultured, sensitive man who knew art history better than many university professors. When Diego left, both knew that something profound had been born between them, but they also knew that the whole world would fight against their love story. In the days that followed, Diego and Sofia began to see each other regularly, always away from the spotlight and from places frequented by Madrid's high society. They met in small neighborhood cafes, walked through the city's lesser-known parks, visited museums during crowded hours. Each encounter consolidated what both had intuited from the first moment. They were made for each other. Diego rediscovered through Sofia's eyes the beauty of simple things, the pleasure of an authentic conversation, the joy of sharing intellectual passions without ulterior motives. Sofia saw in Diego not the unreachable millionaire, but a wounded man who needed to rediscover the capacity to love and be loved. The relationship, however, had to face growing pressures from all directions. Madrid's high society had unleashed a subtle but relentless campaign against Sofia. In the capital's salons, poisonous gossip circulated. She's a fortune hunter. She had planned everything to seduce Diego. She's a woman of easy morals who used charm to manipulate a vulnerable man. The economic pressures were even more direct. Carmen Lopez was fired from the villas of some historical clients, officially due to staff downsizing, but actually because Madrid's aristocratic families didn't want to be associated with the mother of the woman who was ruining Diego Mendoza. Sofia saw her candidacy for the Restoration Master's degree rejected without official explanations, but with the clear feeling that her name had become uncomfortable in academic environments linked to wealthy families. Diego realized what was happening, and his reaction was immediate and decisive. He used his influence to protect Sofia and her mother, but above all, he made a decision that shocked the Spanish financial world. He publicly announced his relationship with Sofia through an exclusive interview in El País. The interview was a masterpiece of sincerity and dignity. Diego told of his 20 years of loneliness, his inability to find authentic love in a world where everything is measured with money, and how Sofia had given him back the capacity to experience genuine emotions. He didn't apologize for his choices, didn't justify himself for having broken social conventions, but proudly claimed the right to love whoever he wanted. "True love knows no social classes," he said in the interview. "Sofia has taught me that richness of heart is worth more than any financial patrimony." The reaction was explosive. Half of high society condemned him as a traitor to family traditions. The other half admired him for the courage to challenge conventions. But what most impacted was the reaction of ordinary people. Thousands of letters of support arrived at the newspaper's editorial office. Thousands of positive comments on social networks transformed Diego and Sofia into symbols of a love that transcends social barriers. Sofia, for her part, demonstrated a class and dignity that silenced many criticisms. In a counter-interview, she declared she had never sought Diego's wealth, but had found in him a soulmate with whom to share intellectual and artistic passions. She spoke of her future projects, her desire to contribute to the conservation of Spanish artistic heritage, her will to build something meaningful with the man she loved. The turning point came when Diego decided to take the definitive step. He not only wanted to be with Sofia, but to do so in front of the whole world, openly challenging those who opposed them. 6 months after that fateful night of dancing, Diego organized what would become the most talked-about social event of the year. A second charity ball at the Crystal Palace with a precise objective that he kept secret until the last moment. The invitation was extended to all the most influential personalities in Spain: businessmen, politicians, artists, intellectuals. But this time, alongside the names of the economic elite, also appeared those of ordinary people who had distinguished themselves through social, artistic, or cultural merits. Diego wanted the world to see that a person's value isn't measured by their bank account. The night of the ball, the Crystal Palace was even more splendid than usual. The gardens were illuminated by thousands of LED lights that created a fairy tale atmosphere. The orchestra had been replaced by an ensemble of internationally famous musicians, and every detail was cared for to perfection. Diego arrived alone, extremely elegant in his tuxedo, but with a serene and determined expression that contrasted with the attention of previous months. The guests observed him with curiosity, wondering what he had in mind and whether Sofia would appear. The answer came at 10 o'clock when the doors of the main hall opened and Sofia made her entrance, but this time she wasn't wearing the waitress uniform. She wore a midnight blue velvet evening gown, specially designed for her by an emerging stylist that enhanced her natural beauty without ostentation. Her hair was gathered in an elegant bun adorned with a diamond tiara that had belonged to Diego's mother. The silence that fell over the hall was different from that of 6 months before. It was no longer shock or scandal, but genuine admiration. Sofia moved with the grace of a princess, but with the simplicity of someone who had never forgotten her origins. Diego went to meet her halfway across the hall and offered her his arm. This time, when they headed toward the dance floor, there were no murmurs of disapproval, but respectful applause that grew in intensity until it became an ovation. When they began to dance, the magic was repeated, multiplied by 1,000. Diego and Sofia moved as if they had been created to dance together in perfect harmony, not only physical, but spiritual. Around them, other couples joined the dance, creating a tableau of elegance and beauty that none of those present would ever forget. But the most emotional moment came when the music stopped and Diego, in front of all the guests, knelt in the center of the floor, extracting an engagement ring that had belonged to the Mendoza family for 5 generations. The words he pronounced resonated clearly throughout the hall. "Sofia, you have managed to bring light back to my life when I thought it was lost forever. Will you marry me?" Sofia's answer was a yes, pronounced with a firm voice and eyes bright with emotion. The applause that erupted was thunderous and genuine. Even the most skeptical had surrendered to the force of such an authentic love. The wedding was celebrated 3 months later in the Crystal Palace Chapel with a ceremony that mixed aristocratic tradition and genuine simplicity. Sofia wore the wedding dress that had belonged to Diego's mother, but enriched with details that reflected her artistic personality. After the wedding, Diego and Sofia founded together the Esperanza Foundation, in memory of the first girl Diego had loved, dedicated to supporting meritorious young artists from disadvantaged families. Sofia became curator of important art exhibitions, realizing her dream of working in the world of artistic restoration and conservation. Their love story became legend, cited as an example of how the authenticity of feelings can overcome any social barrier. Diego had learned that true love isn't found in high society salons, but in the heart of people who know how to see beyond appearances. And every year on the anniversary of their first dance, Diego and Sofia dance again in the Crystal Palace Hall, reminding the world that authentic love is the only wealth that cannot be bought, but only recognized and guarded by those who have a heart pure enough to welcome it. If this story has made you believe that true love can overcome any social barrier and that the beauty of the soul is worth more than any material wealth, give it a like and share this video. Diego and Sofia have shown us that sometimes miracles happen when we least expect them. Don't miss the next episode where you'll discover another incredible story of how destiny can change life in a single instant. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss stories that will make you believe in the magic of love.